Chapter 1178 changed the rules on us. Imu delivered a Domi Reversi on Luffy and Loki, and it did literally nothing. So naturally you're thinking they're built different, they're immune, but then you remember Rocks. This man had the mental fortitude, and Imu still slid through him like he wasn't even there. And here's the part that I don't hear people talk about. Imu technically didn't do that in person, not to Rocks and not in Elbaf either. So either Luffy and Loki are operating on a level Rocks couldn't even dream of, or none of them have ever seen the genuine Domi Reversi at full power. So Imu runs the Domi Reversi on Luffy and Loki in chapter 1178, and it doesn't really register. No delay, no partial takeover, it just doesn't take hold. And that should be a relief, except we've already watched this thing drop people who had no business going down. Because if Luffy and Loki are actually immune to Domi Reversi, then Imu's power already has a ceiling. But if they're not, then something about that moment doesn't add up, and those two ideas paint completely different pictures of what Imu's power actually is. Because depending on where you stand, you either think Luffy has already outgrown whatever Imu can throw at him, or you think Imu hasn't been there in person until now. And that's not an academic question anymore, because at the end of chapter 1178, Imu doesn't just announce that they're leaving Pangaea Castle. We now know they've actually arrived at Elbaf thanks to chapter 1179. So whatever is coming next, it's about to be delivered in person. On the surface, the easiest answer is that Luffy and Loki are just immune. Imu doesn't even address them like normal people, he just calls them Nika and Needhogger first. So if those fruits are natural opposites to whatever Imu represents, then yeah, Domi Reversi not working would make sense. But then Rocks just breaks that idea, because this is someone with enough willpower to at least resist Imu even for a moment. And that still wasn't enough. He pushed back and he still got taken over. So now the question isn't just, are Luffy and Loki immune? It's what makes them different from someone like Rocks in the first place? Because willpower alone clearly isn't the answer. So you gotta ask, what if it was never about resisting Domi Reversi and more about whether we've seen it at full power? So one explanation is that it's not just willpower, it's the combination. Luffy has Nika, Loki has Needhogger, both have Kakurasaki, so maybe that's the difference. Maybe willpower alone creates resistance, but those specific fruits turns that resistance into something closer to immunity. And that sounds like it works until you realize that it doesn't really explain the bigger problem, because every time we've seen Domi Reversi go off, Imu wasn't there, not physically, not in person, and I need you to sit with that, because now the question shifts again, because it's not just what makes Luffy and Loki different, it's what version of this ability, Domi Reversi, are we even looking at? Because if Imu has only ever used Domi Reversi through a middleman, then we've never seen what it does in person. I think another way to look at this is scale, because we've seen something similar before in One Piece where larger targets needed more to break whatever was controlling them. And the throw and bark parallels in Elbaf have been way too consistent for that to be accidental. Oars needed way more salt to break free from the Kage no Mi than anyone else, and the Straw Hats never even got to find out if that did the trick, because Moria jumped in like he wasn't already losing and made the whole situation significantly worse for everyone involved. So now apply that here. Loki isn't just a giant, he's an ancient giant with a mythical zone on top of that. The sheer scale of what you have to override there is on a completely different level. And if you really wanted to stretch it, sure, Luffy can expand himself to a giant size in Gear 5th, but even that feels like a reach compared to what Loki represents physically. But that doesn't really hold up either, because we've already seen Domi Reversi work on giants before. Dory and Brocky weren't immune, so I guess size alone can't be the deciding factor. So now you're stacking variables on top of each other. Willpower, double fruits, scale, and now how the ability is even being used in the first place. And at a certain point, we have to consider whether Domi Reversi isn't just like an on-off switch, but something more gradual, like how much of it Imu is actually activating. But here's the thing, at this point, maybe the answer has nothing to do with how the ability works. Maybe it's just thematic, because Domi Reversi is controlled, full stop. It overrides your will. It makes you betray yourself. And Nika and Needhogger, honestly, are the thematic opposite of that. They're freedom, defiance, the thing that exists specifically to break imposed orders. So, of course, it doesn't work on Luffy. He's literally the counter to everything that ability is built on. And that sounds perfect until, again, Rocks, because I'm sorry. Rocks D. Sebek was not lacking in defiance. That's not an argument to make. And Imu still took him over. So the thematic explanation can only go so far, which leaves you with two options that both feel like they're on purpose. Either Domi Reversi genuinely can't go past a certain point, or we've been watching a version of it that wasn't even close to full power. And with Imu already at Elbaf, we're not gonna guess anymore. The next time Domi Reversi shows up, it's not coming through a proxy, it's not going through Gunko. So go ahead, like, subscribe, hit the bell, hype the video, and stay locked in, because the next time this happens, Oda is gonna blow our fucking minds in ways you've never imagined. Here's where we're at now. We've got two possibilities. Either Luffy and Loki are immune to Domi Reversi, like genuinely actually immune, or they just haven't been hit by the real version yet. And those two possibilities lead to completely different outcomes, because if they're immune, then Domi Reversi already has a limit. But if they're not, then what we saw in chapter 1178 wasn't enough for someone like Luffy or Loki. And now Imu has left Pangaea Castle and arrived at Elbaf in person, which means whatever happens next isn't operating under the same conditions, because at that point, it's not even about whether Domi Reversi works on Luffy or Loki anymore. It's about what happens when Imu uses it in person. And now that they're here, if what we saw before wasn't enough, then whatever comes next might be. And I have a video explaining how 3 characters might have shown us the true extent of Imu's powers from the jump.